Now, if there's a propagandist, they're going to say, no, 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 repetition, 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 repetition.
Hi, I'm Jim O'Shaughnessy, and welcome to Infinite Loops. Sometimes we get caught up in what feel like infinite loops when trying to figure things out. Markets go up and down, research is presented and then refuted, and we find ourselves right back where we started. The goal of this podcast is to learn how we can reset our thinking on issues that hopefully leaves us with a better understanding as to why we think the way we think and how we might be able to change that to avoid going in infinite loops of thought. We hope to offer our listeners a fresh perspective on a variety of issues and look at them through a multifaceted lens, including history, philosophy, art, science, linguistics, and yes, also through quantitative analysis. And through these discussions, help you not only become a better investor, but also become a more nuanced thinker. With each episode, we hope to bring you along with us as we learn together. Thanks for joining us. Now please enjoy this episode of Infinite Loops.
Jim O'Shaughnessy is Chairman and Co-Chief Investment Officer of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management, where Jamie Catherwood is an associate. All opinions expressed by Jim, Jamie, and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Clients of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Well, hello, everybody. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with another episode of Infinite Loops, and I'm super excited about my guest today, Zach Resnick of Unbounded Capital. I got a chance to meet Zach at Capital Camp, which is a little soiree that my son and Brent Beshore put on. And I personally think, now obviously I'm going to say this because my son is involved, but I honestly believe that it is probably one of the only conferences that I would go to because it's filled with interesting people. There are lots of fascinating discussions, and one of which led to me having Zach on the podcast. But so we bonded while we were chatting about several things. We bonded over music and travel, which we're going to talk about later, and about what is now, which just baffles me, living in the United States of America, the seemingly controversial opinion that the individual should have maximum freedom and, the country they live in should have a rule of law. Welcome, Zach.
Thanks for having me on today, Jim. Really happy to be here.
So one of the things that I loved about our conversation, and I'm just going to let you go, because you looked at me and you said, and I admit that I know very little about Bitcoin. I'm studying it. And maybe it's because I'm an old that I'm not getting it entirely. It doesn't mean that I don't have some investments in it just to sort of see what they do. But you had a really interesting take, which, by the way, you spell out very eloquently at your website, which we'll have in the show notes. About why you believe in Bitcoin. Basically, Bitcoin is a network created by, incredible potential, right? And one of the things that you say, though, is you only believe in a specific kind of Bitcoin. And I'm just going to let you give us your thesis. I will not interrupt.
Well, thank you, Jim. And just to kind of define some terms, when I use the word Bitcoin, I'm talking about the technology or the network, of which there's several different primary implementations. And when I'm going to talk about a specific asset or an implementation, I'm going to use the ticker symbol. So the popular version of Bitcoin is BTC. There's another one called Bitcoin Cash or BCH. And then there's another one called Bitcoin SV. And that's the asset and the network that I think is going to really transform the way that we interact as humans in the world and how our global financial system operates. So I think I want to first start with just what I'm excited about with Bitcoin, which is the possibility for a public database at scale. So historically, all of our data has been in various different types of private databases. Pre-internet, pre-computers, these databases were physical. Then we kind of moved these databases onto intranets. Then we moved it onto the internet. But still, even doing this Zoom right now, we're not using any type of public database. We're accessing probably somewhere between thousands and tens of thousands of different private databases today to have this conversation. There's a lot of things, and for most data where that's the most efficient way to do things, but there's a lot of data, especially really important and secure data, where putting it on a disparate amount of private databases rather than encrypting it and putting it on a single public database doesn't make a lot of sense. And we haven't seen, I'd say, the move to a public database en masse yet, largely because most people in the crypto and blockchain world are not excited about scaling blockchains and having there be scalable public distributed ledgers, but they're really excited about inefficient ledgers that can be used to facilitate illegal and extra illegal activity. And I think that's a pretty strong claim. Most people that are, say, excited about the BTC version of Bitcoin, Ethereum, most crypto assets would not characterize their view as, we're doing this to optimize for activity that governments don't sanction. But whether they think it or not, the design choices of the developers behind these networks do. So when you look at the BTC version of Bitcoin, what you see is a version of Bitcoin with a severe limit on scale, where the size of each block in the blockchain can only be 1 megabyte. And they're doing that because they want to make sure that if the government ever said, hey, you can't use the Bitcoin network, or you can't use the Bitcoin network for X, then they would be able to, on their phones, Raspberry Pis, and laptops, run the Bitcoin node software, kind of in resistance. And the problem with scaling blockchains is then the blockchains get too big to run the node software on your phones and computers. That's what happens when you have economies of scale and efficiency. You go into data centers and highly specialized equipment. So that's kind of the core optimization that the Ethereum blockchain today makes, that the BTC blockchain makes. And I don't think that optimization is one that most people in the world want to make. I understand it for those that have a kind of a more niche anarchist point of view. And I'm a freedom-loving libertarian type of guy. I just think, openly antagonizing governments and financial regulators around the world is not the most likely way of achieving, freedom. Call me crazy, but in the crypto world today, that is. So what does Unbounded focus on? We focus on scalable blockchains. And from our perspectives, there's really just one of those today, which is the kind of original vision and version of Bitcoin, or Bitcoin SV. And rather than optimizing around kind of facilitating a very small number of financial transactions for a specific purpose, kind of the original kind of form of Bitcoin outlined in the Bitcoin white paper, or as today in the form of Bitcoin SV, wants to have a scalable public ledger, such that, yes, you're doing lots of payments, but you're actually going to be primarily using it to store and interact with different types of data. And that's only possible when you have the capacity for a lot of data and when it's really fast and cheap to use. So there's whole business models that aren't possible today because we've never seen a micropayment or nano payment technology take off at scale. We have that technology today with Bitcoin SV, and kind of from my understanding, the easiest and kind of most secure way to do micro and nano payments. So I'm really excited to see how that's going, really transform our world over the coming years. We definitely have some, theses at Unbounded about which industries are going to be most affected first. I'd say we're definitely interested in, exchanges, in gaming, say before we are healthcare. But I kind of view this as like in the mid-90s, even if you're the smartest VC investing in the internet, having a high conviction view about which industries are going to be majorly disrupted in 3 to 5 years is going to be really hard. So we just try to stay on top of it and support the entrepreneurs that are doing really ambitious things where they need a scalable blockchain, and where specifically Bitcoin SV is the only thing that could allow them to achieve their vision.
Wow. So that was very clear, and even I understood it, which means most people are going to be able to understand it. So tell me, other than, it's a provocative claim to say that many of the developers of BTC are doing that to enable basically criminal activity. And so we'll set that point aside for a minute. I understand it because of the limitations. Absolutely, I do understand it. Tell me why, though. I mean, because you got me sold. Why is your thesis not the dominant one right now?
So I think because of religion and tribalism. So the crypto world most of the wealth today in the crypto world is not held by large institutional investors. And if even those that are holding it, they aren't high conviction such that they're going to hold all the way down, say a 90% drawdown or something. The people that are really moving markets in crypto are those that were in there to some degree early. And what do all the early crypto holders have in common? That for the most part, they had a very kind of niche anarchist view, a form of libertarianism, where they cared more about enacting that value in the world than making money. And typically markets are most efficient when people are trying to make money rather than trying to be part of a cool club or trying to change the world. I'm someone who cares deeply about changing the world, and I think doing that through companies and networks is really great. But I think trying to find the alignment of where things are creating long-standing enterprise value and making that positive change is the most likely way to achieve that. But I didn't always think that. I used to be kind of in this crypto consensus and naively thought that how could governments ever take down Bitcoin? How could we won't let them? We'll change the code so network will be really small and they won't be able to do anything about it. I used to think that, like most of the folks in the crypto world today. And when you have this kind of niche point of view and you're probably an outsider for a lot of your life, maybe most of your life, and then you make more money than you could ever possibly imagine by doubling down on that viewpoint with this thesis, are you really going to change your mind? And kind of the crude analogy that I like to make is, imagine you're a Hasidic Jew and one day, because of these rituals that you're following, you 100x your net worth in a year. Are you going to be more or less likely to be open to another way of living your life? So I wrote a short piece on this that maybe you could link to in the show notes on kind of the crypto religion, but I really think it's fundamentally a psychological phenomenon more so than a rational phenomenon. And most of the people that I speak with, my viewpoint sounds reasonable. Then they kind of go out and talk to their crypto friends or read mainstream crypto sources. And at some point, maybe it sounds less reasonable after kind of that telephone game. But I really do think that as kind of blockchain grows, people will be excited about it for what it can do in terms of mass consumer adoption and changing mass industries, not kind of growing industries as large as we can in this kind of outside of the reach government sphere. Seems reasonable to me, but Jim, you're right. It is kind of a contrarian view right now, and we'll see how long that lasts. I have a lot of confidence that in the next few years that will go from kind of a contrarian view to a more mainstream point of view. But there's a lot of misinformation, and the Mike Novogratzes of the world, for example, would not say that they're really long these assets because of these kind of specific optimizations. And most of the folks that are buying into these assets, I think, don't understand really why these networks stop scaling. So I view, not just kind of for our fund and our portfolio companies, but also kind of for just the development of the world, I feel a responsibility to kind of make that truth understood, because right now we have so much capital going into these kind of glorified Ponzi schemes in the crypto world, rather than going into the hands of entrepreneurs really changing the world for the better.
Wow, great answer. And you hit almost all of my hot buttons. You must have researched me.
Just a little bit.
The personal experience that you note with the Hasidic Jew 100xing his belief system. Whoa. I mean, so I've done lots of research into belief systems. Man, oh man, they are incredibly powerful. They've even gotten me to the point where I try not to use the term I believe anymore. I try to use the term I have a thesis or a hypothesis, because on the one hand, beliefs basically are unfalsifiable, right? If we're going to be all Karl Popper about it. And if you have an unfalsifiable position, well, okay, it's not something that you can go on, by the way, to use your own idea to mainstream it. Because a lot of people are going to look and they're going to say, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And you're just going to say, ignore that, right? Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. So bingo for me, at least, on the power of belief. The religious aspect, I also bing right there with you. Now, to be fair, we've seen that happening. I have this thesis about what's going on right now. I call it the Great Reshuffle. And lots of things are changing. I think many for the better. For example, mainstreaming a blockchain that can do the things that you envision, like that is amazing. And I want to talk in just 1 minute about where you see the greatest use cases for that kind of blockchain. And then finally, the promotional nature of a lot of people. I've been a investor and a fiduciary for a long time, and I call it the cringe factor. If there's somebody who is unwilling to admit that whatever they're advocating for has some flaws, right? And when questioned about it, either try to change the conversation or go back to their script, all of that raises a red flag for me. And obviously not all folks that I talk with about these new technologies are in that space. But I think that you're really you're very right about the tribalism, and it's not just confined to Bitcoin, right? It's like everywhere. And maybe we can chat about that a little bit more later on. But for right now, give me the 5 best use cases for your version of Bitcoin.
So I think a lot of it starts with micropayments, and that's the area that I'm most heavily invested in and most excited about in the near term. So with any system, you're only as strong as your weak link. And at Unbounded, we would argue the internet's weak link is payments. Like it's its first, second, third, fourth, fifth weakest link, every single regard. So I read a lot of financial newsletters. Probably a lot of people listening to this are also fans of Matt Levine. He also links to other stuff at the bottom of his newsletter. I'm a subscriber to Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, but not every single one of these things. So sometimes I click, the Financial Times article that seems fun, and then I'm told I have to not just, pay a bunch of money to become a subscriber, or pay a small amount of money for a month and then pay more money later when I'm more likely to forget. But I have to go through all this effort to do it, and I read it on my iPad, and it's just a terrible user experience. I'd love to be able to swipe up and just pay 10, 20, 50, $2 for the right article, but I can't right now. And that's not because there's a lack of, I'd say, consumer preference for this. It's because we haven't had the technology until recently, and now most folks don't understand the technology or how to use it, such that you can do micropayments in a secure, fast way. So if you could just with your Apple Pay do these really small payments, then how I consume articles, and this applies broadly to really all content, will radically change. So I still think there's a room for subscription models, but having subscription or bust is quite terrible. And this also kind of goes into, with the incredible market of online advertising, one of the biggest markets in the entire world, which is today we've monetized our internet by, monetizing your attention. And there's a lot of people in this world that would much rather just trade that, fair market value for your attention, which we have no sense of because there's no liquidity and no efficiency in price discovery in Google's algorithms. But I also think that will change. And I think probably, Jim, you and I, in 99.9% of cases, maybe even 100, we'd rather just pay the money than trade our time for attention and for centering on things. Maybe there's a few cases when I'm doing research to buy something where I would want a targeted advertisement. Besides that, I pretty much never want them. And I'd love to be able to express that preference. And today we don't have the tech stack to do that. But when that changes, not just the way that kind of all consumer, I'd say, content products will change, but fundamentally the way we think about things will change. Is there's no longer going to be as much of an economic incentive to program us via advertising. It will be more just on kind of providing quality content. And we're seeing kind of more distribution of this information with things like Substack. But I'm really excited for, the literal millions of business models that me and my partners and no one could come up with right now, but only the ingenuity of the entrepreneurs over the coming decades will, once it's actually possible. So that's kind of like one example of micropayments, but I think there's whole new business models, whole industries that are going to be wildly disruptive when businesses can profitably, say, charge you 1 cent and have high margins.
Wow. I mean, I completely agree with that. Again, the assessment of not wanting to be the product is near and dear to my heart. Not wanting my attention to be monetized by someone else. I'd like to monetize my attention, right? I have a friend, Brian Romelli. I don't know whether you're familiar with Brian's work, but he's like nailed a lot of what's happening. And he has a history and actual, dated things that he wrote. And man, he's got a great batting average. And one of his current, I'm having him back on the podcast. I'm really excited about that because sometimes he just goes offline, which I think is kind of cool, actually. But one of the things that he's been pounding the table about is that our current methodology, especially with social media, is exactly upside down. In other words, Brian believes, and I share this belief, that you, Zach, me, Jim, we should own our data and we should be able to decide whether we're going to sell it or not. It puts the shoe on the completely different foot. It turns everything upside down, I think. But man, as you point out, the potential for this is almost limitless in terms of what future entrepreneurs will be able to do using that system. I have a little experience watching micropayments, not of this nature. Okay, let me be very clear about that. But in the physical world, I in the past have supported a charitable foundation called the Acumen Fund. I don't know whether you've ever heard of them.
I have. I've read her book. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Very familiar.
Okay. Yeah. So one of the things that they did was introduce the idea of micropayments and microloans. Most of their work is done in the emerging countries, but man, did it transform the ability of farmers, the ability of people to buy land, the ability of people to, buy mosquito netting for the avoidance of malaria. I mean, it was wildly successful. So that's it in the physical world. Imagine it with the unlimited leverage of the digital world. And man, that gets me pretty excited.
Yeah, I'm really excited by this all, and I view so much opportunity in funding entrepreneurs and funding people in the developing world. Even now today, the average interest rate that an entrepreneur or that a person is paying for, say, a loan in the developing world is so high. And this is in a world where you have some institutions that are happily losing their money with negative interest rates in a bank, where they could be coming in and loaning at 20% annually and being at half or less of the market rate for that. And now with the data you're going to be able to collect by having all of these micropayments, you'll be able to underwrite so much more effectively. And this is also something I'm excited about. What's FICO scores are probably the best at scale credit metric that we have, which is pretty laughable in 2021. As someone who used to run a couple of businesses, kind of getting the best of these systems, there's a lot of room to be desired. And if you could easily, in an anonymized way, say, look at effectively every transaction this person does on their phone or on the internet, you'd be able to perhaps underwrite better than someone you have, years of traditional banking history with. And we even have a portfolio company that's working on this problem in Western Africa. And I think they're going to be one of many companies that just kind of really accelerates the flow of capital from the developed world to the developing world out of profit interest. And I think that the biggest opportunities over the coming decades will be not in the developed world where markets are most efficient.
So younger people, mostly, some people a little older, but mostly younger people seem to have a somewhat negative view of capitalism. And this makes me crazy, because what they have a negative view of and what they should have a negative view of is crony capitalism, where regulatory capture by big firms, capture means they bought and paid for the people who make the laws. in many respects, sometimes, I mean, when do you think the last time an actual congressperson actually wrote a bill? Hint, a long time ago. They're currently written by lobbyists. And for the most part, there are some congresspeople who will even admit that they haven't read it. They literally have not read the bill that they're sponsoring. That is insane. And
Well,
so
you can't, though. I mean, if you read every single bill, you might not even have enough time to sleep with how long these bills are now.
well, exactly, right? Gettysburg Address, how many words is it? Like 850.
Yeah.
So you're exactly right. And so the way that things are going right now, I think crushing crony capitalism is a high priority, because I think that younger people, if they understood the free market, which is a completely different thing, right? The free market is what enables all of the cool stuff that we have for the most part, right? And look, I'm not Panglossian here. There's problems with everything, and there will be problems if we even move towards a freer market. I believe passionately in the freedom of speech and the rule of law. And when you have those things, if you look at the results over long periods of time, wonder of wonders, the countries that have freedom of speech and the rule of law do vastly better than countries that don't. But another thing that I think the free market can really help with is, like, it's a wave that is almost, if you let it happen, could be a tsunami, and it would just literally go over the crony capitalists, the people who have regulatory capture. And that's why I'm excited by it. I think that if people would expand on the difference between crony capitalism and free markets, they're very, very different things. And so it's one of the problems with people who become label thinkers. And I know you love poker, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But this is like fantastic as far as I'm concerned. But let's ask, the obvious question here is, man, you are up against, like, that scene in Game of Thrones when Jon Snow is alone with the sword and there's like 1,000 horses riding at him. Do you feel like that?
I haven't seen the show, but I've seen the meme.
Okay.
I'd say I used to feel more like that. I still feel sometimes like that, especially when, as often happens to me, I'll have a great kind of first interaction with someone. They'll be really interested, and then their diligence process will be, let me ask my friends that I perceive as smarter than me on this topic what they think. And then, for the most part, if they're going to really privilege the views of their friends rather than their own mental models, the relationship is probably not going to continue at the rate that we might have both thought it was after that initial interaction. And that's disappointing to me. And I'd say I used to be a lot more frustrated, but now I'm spending a lot higher percentage of my time around people that don't have the biases and the tribalism of the crypto world. So they're a lot more open, as well as, while some crypto people are getting even more tribal and more entrenched in their beliefs as they get richer and richer, doubling down, tripling down, quadrupling down on those beliefs. There also are a lot of crypto folks that are kind of in this crypto consensus, people that, folks would know as of lovers of Ethereum and BTC Bitcoin, that went from, I'm never going to talk to this guy, to, reading my newsletter every week and coming to the webinars, and, some even kind of investing with us and making, encouraging us not to tell anyone else about who these people are, at least for now, where it's kind of not politically in what they perceived as their best interests, likely over the short term. So I'm really encouraged by the fact that really the majority of my conversations are with people that are open now, rather than people that are kind of going up against me. But I do understand that today, the BSV ecosystem is a tiny fraction of the broader crypto world. But as an investor, I kind of love that. There's this yin and yang, not just for my industry, but between fundraising and, how profitable your strategy is. And typically the more profitable your strategy is, the harder it's going to be to fundraise, and vice versa. There's a lot of exceptions there, and there's a lot of really terrible strategies that are hard to fundraise for. But in terms of some of like the best outperforming, strategies, trades, and things, they were never easy to fundraise for at the beginning, because they often, go directly up against the thesis of the person you're trying to raise money for, or many theses, or in my case, often they're like cultural identity, especially kind of the younger they are, the less likely they are to have a family, the more likely that the crypto community is now their, church, synagogue, family, kind of everything all in one. So I would say when I experience it, it's a love-hate, which is, man, I really wish that I could be making a bigger difference right now. I really think the world needs this. I would love to kind of be at that next stage. The other part is, wow, I still have really not a lot of competition on what I think is going to be like the fastest growing market and the most important technological innovation of the coming decades. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool. But again, the best technology doesn't always win, right? The history is littered with examples of the best technology not winning. You think of Sony Betamax versus VHS. I mean, I'm old enough to have seen both. And let me tell you, Sony Betamax was a ton better than VHS, but VHS won for a variety of outside reasons. And, the joke is, if you want to see where the world's going next, look at the pornography industry, because they are, thought leaders, if you will. And they were also one of the big reasons that VHS won as opposed to Sony. So I'm not saying that this technology won't win. I hope it does. I mean, it's like really cool. But the other problem is with the so the idea of memes is, many people who haven't studied it think memes are relatively recent. They're not at all. Memes are ideas that spread. And it used to be that they spread person to person, and the robustness of a meme had nothing to do with whether it was true or false. It had to do with how could it replicate? Could it replicate quickly, or could it not replicate at all? So if you study history, these are how great religions get founded. These are how great empires get founded. And so the reason I bring this up is the meme, or memes rather, around Bitcoin are sort of still overwhelmingly about BTC. If you do people who are a little more forward in the way they think about it than Ethereum, it is obviously you don't think this, but do a lot of people say to you, like, man, that is a mountain that is just too hard to climb?
Joe, I want to start by pushing back against your Betamax versus VHS thing. A lot of people have this misconception that Betamax was so much better and VHS won out and it was, a completely inferior technology. I think the difference is looking at the product versus the technology. My understanding of why VHS won out was because it was a better product because it allowed you to record your shows. Betamax, while having higher definition, it wasn't as good as a product because most of the things you wanted to use it for, you couldn't use it for. So I think that, in some ways, like Linux has better technological features, but overall, there's like few Linux overall product suites that compare to the average person for using Windows, using Mac, using Apple. So I think that's really what's most relevant here. And I think when you want to look at understanding Bitcoin and the way the blockchain ecosystem has developed, I think you should really look at not necessarily where people have tried to get rich on liquid crypto assets. And you should look at, I think, what is most likely to be adopted as a future product. And today, a lot of people say BTC Bitcoin has been adopted, but it hasn't really been adopted in a meaningful way because it can't by design. Because 1 megabyte can only hold 3,500 simple transactions per every block per every 10 minutes. That's 7 transactions a second. MasterCard is claimed to do 40,000 transactions a second. Ethereum is, at around 15 or 17. Visa is at 24,000. BSV today is at 70,000 transactions per second. So they're really just trying to be two very different things. And BTC is getting speculated on by people. People are looking to store their wealth and speculate that it will stay the same or go up. And many people are looking to not store wealth, but they're put their money in the asset and sell to someone else for a higher price. And I understand that something could just be something you speculate on the future value of and that you store wealth in. I personally think that's unlikely to be competitive over a long time horizon and potentially over a short time horizon towards one that you can also store your wealth in, but then also transact at 1/10,000th of the price and potentially lower and lower and lower. But that's kind of another conversation. These two things are not trying to be the same technology. And on any type of micro and nano payment thing, one isn't better or worse than the other. One can do it and one can't. So that's what I'm betting on, which is, people using micropayments, people using a fast and efficient blockchain, adopting it by actually using it for transactions. And today, the BSV version of Bitcoin regularly does between like 10 and 15x the amount of transactions every day compared to BTC Bitcoin, just by people not hearing about it. That's because those transactions are capped, where the BSV network, like Bitcoin was outlined originally, is unbounded in its ability to scale. It's just limited by Moore's law and human ingenuity. And I'd much rather bet on that than layer 2s and layer 3s and layer 4 things masquerading as blockchains.
I love the idea of a much larger total addressable market. But I got to keep asking. And earlier you talked about the government. And let's talk about the U.S. federal government for a little here. Like, one of my hard and fast rules is never piss off the federal government, because you know what? That is a losing, the probabilities about that. Now, we've seen some certain personalities who shall remain nameless who have pissed off the federal government, we think. But if you get them really pissed off, you're going to lose. They're going to win. I mean, the point I often bring up is that the Department of Education has something like 150,000 M16s. The Department of Education is heavily armed. I would not want to go up against that. But so the question that I have here is, let's say the feds do get pissed, and like Al Capone, they don't ban Bitcoin, but they start taxing it. Does your version of Bitcoin SV survive that better than BTC?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think most likely Bitcoin SV is going to be the most widely used database in the world over the coming years, and used by world governments to do things like collect taxes. That's because this network is optimizing for scale, and I don't think most of the transactions on the network will be used using this volatile, really kind of commodity that is on a fundamental level like an expression of the value of the real estate of this database in the future. So if you want to find a way to bet directly on people wanting to write data and to use this blockchain, that is a way to do it. Today, the value of the asset is completely divorced really from that and more just about random speculative stuff. But I think as the market grows and matures, that will become more and more true for this asset and the kind of relationship between the asset and the usage of the network. Where with BTC, the entire value proposition is that if the government wanted to tax directly from it, it couldn't. So the second that the government is able to do so, which I am highly confident it will, this kind of whole thing comes crashing down. I mean, already today, the government does tax your gains on BTC Bitcoin. Whether you report them or not is another question, but this is not like this is an untaxable asset. So the real question is, once governments kind of wise up to how to actually compel miners to follow the law. So today, something that the vast majority of folks that are long BTC, that are bullish about crypto, think is that if you have this kind of proof of work network that's really inefficient, well, because you'd be able to run the software on your phones and resist, or that there'd be other jurisdictions where businesses could operate, if governments ever say, hey, miners, we see that this wallet on the blockchain that you're authenticating kind of every block is the wallet of a Chinese fentanyl gang, and there's hundreds of millions of dollars of Bitcoin there, we would like to confiscate that. And that's not a made-up example. We know that wallet address. We also know wallet addresses that were used by Al-Qaeda. These are, definitely the majority of transactions of Bitcoin are not money laundering, but it's to say that it hasn't been used for that is kind of laughable. And, with normal bank accounts, if you know that the bank account of a, say, drug cartel is X numbers, and then you figure that out, you give an order to the bank, and the bank doesn't say, no, actually, sorry, government, we'd love to, but, this is a bank and these are our clients. The government seizes that money and the banks comply with that. Today, governments haven't really wised up to how to do that in kind of an efficient way, but that's what I think the future of blockchains are. It makes it much more difficult for, say, governments to seize assets, and you have to get like a global consensus around this. So I think it provides a lot more freedom than, say, the traditional process of seizing assets, especially in the United States. But to say that these wallets that we know are controlled by nefarious actors that have committed global crimes are just going to be untouchable because, hey, it's a blockchain and we can't, regulate that, we can't tax it directly, I think is hilarious now. And this is coming from someone that 3.5 years ago, go hung, like, there's no way they could do it. This is the future. Everyone's going to use Bitcoin or something like it. And, part of me thinks there's some advantages to that, but I think as I've gotten a little older, I would see that probably as a net negative, as much as I wish most governments were a lot smaller. But yeah, I'm chiefly a fiduciary and an investor that likes to make money, and betting on that world, which is if you're holding BTC or ETH, whether you think it or not, you're expressing that view, at least if you're holding for a long time horizon, I think is a very indefensible thesis, but we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, so that's very interesting in terms of the government. If you think the government can't find and seize those assets, yeah, they can, and they probably will. But as you say, as they wise up, one of the problems that I always had when looking at traditional BTC was, to me, calling it a store of value actually made me laugh out loud, because it is a store of value is the primary aim of any currency is that it is a store of value, which means that there's not a lot of volatility tied to that currency. Now, I understand, like, what the Fed is doing is going to cause inflation, and it's another form of taxation. I mean, even Ben Bernanke himself said inflation is a tax. And, we currently are still the global reserve currency. I think it's going to be difficult to dislodge that. I think maybe, Bitcoin SV might be able to help that. But I like your thesis that it's the reason for the differences allow it to be more mainstream. So my question becomes, like, you're obviously a totally switched on young guy. You know about all the technologies. Most of the people that I know who are Bitcoin fans and enthusiasts, also young, very switched on with tech. Why didn't they go to Bitcoin SV first?
I think there's a lot of reasons. So I could talk about why I didn't go to Bitcoin SV first, and might be instructive. So I was kind of aware of Bitcoin from pretty early on due to playing online poker. So after Black Friday, when the US DOJ shut down like the major poker sites, fairly soon after that, poker sites allowed you to deposit and withdraw in Bitcoin. So I never really tried it. I never looked into it besides maybe a Google search. But I was kind of aware that this was something to be used, and follow the pornography for where an industry is going. I think the gambling industry is also usually at the forefront as well, alongside them. But I didn't really think about it until a chance encounter in 2016. And what got me into it was not so much Bitcoin itself, but what learning about Bitcoin made me realize about monetary policy. And I think a lot of folks, especially that got into Bitcoin, say pre-2017, a lot of their interest and passion came from Bitcoin being tied to understanding that inflation is like the most regressive tax ever to exist, and getting really passionate about that, of which I am today. Still, despite loving Bitcoin SV and not thinking BTC has a long-term, chance of success. But I think when you come from that angle and then you have this product that so easily says it's going to deliver on this thing that you care about, I think it could be quite alluring. And then back to our kind of tribalism, I mean, this is another version of the question you asked at the beginning of the podcast, which is like, how can people, again, in financial markets, like, be so wrong about things and not spend their time looking at the thing that is likely going to win out or ends up winning out? And you've studied belief systems a lot longer than I have, and this is not the first time, and it won't be the last. There is kind of, I'd say, like a very interesting convergence of like a lack of formal organized religion, and that's been declining at a faster and faster pace worldwide, especially in developed countries. So I think the eagerness to be more a part of a tribe today for like someone my age is so much greater than the average person your age, which makes them perhaps a lot more easily able to be seduced by kind of a tribe that gets you really rich and has a lot of fun all the time. So I do think most of it is behavioral. And really, I think when folks come with an open mind and have a conversation with me, read one of our books, interact with some of the many hundreds of entrepreneurs that are building in the BSV ecosystem, I think it's hard to walk away from that and not at least want to learn more. But then a lot of folks, they learn more and then they experience kind of the negative social effects of being a contrarian or of being for this network that has a lot of really negative PR around it that isn't due to the technology, but more a controversy around who created Bitcoin. And what happens is they'll express that to folks, or folks that aren't from the crypto world will express, hey, I met with Zach, really interesting thing happening in BSV, or wow, I use this like game Crypto Fights. They have like all these users and it was really cool. Oh, it's built on BSV. Oh, what's that? And then their friends will say, oh, be careful. I'm glad you talked to me because it's actually a scam just because of, this one person that's associated with this distributed, public network. And that's where a lot of it comes down to. And ultimately, everyone wants to be a contrarian as an investor. But by definition, only a small minority of people can. So I think that the social, emotional, tribal reasons of being part of a tribe explains not just this phenomenon, but really kind of every widespread, way that capital and culture moves phenomenon in our world today.
No question. A book I'm currently reading called The Lucifer Principle basically makes this case going back throughout history. And like many religions, and that's a whole different discussion. Many religions were founded by the people who conquered people. And they founded those religions to keep the people they conquered placid. And thus, Karl Marx, not a huge fan, but religion is the opiate of the masses. He got that one right because and this is new learnings for me, which I get really excited about because I get to unlearn some old things. I had no idea that many of the major philosophies, religions, etc., were literally founded by people who had conquered vast areas and needed a thing to keep these people in line. So there's no question that it's powerful. So let me ask you this though. So let's say people listening to this, and I'll get a lot of feedback like, "Oh, this is crazy," or Zach is like this and that. I always find when an argument is ad hominem, it means that the facts are not on their side. But so what are the best what are the best arguments and points of your adversaries here, if you don't mind me asking you to talk their book?
Oh, no, of course. Yeah, I think that's a really important part of being able to have an investment thesis, being able to steelman the other point of view very well. Are we looking for the pro-BTC steelman or the anti-BSV steelman?
Let's start with the pro-BTC steelman.
Yeah. So I actually think there's if you have a different analysis to what I have on the probability that, say, Bitcoin will be able to be confiscated, then I think there's, especially in terms of like a small percentage of one's portfolio to hedge out the rest of the portfolio, I think it does make a lot of sense. And frankly, even with my current views, Jim, if I knew what I knew now and BTC was at a similar price to BSV and a similar market cap, I think it would be responsible for probably me to own some of that in my portfolio. I think buying it now, it doesn't. But to steelman the point of view, like today, Bitcoin, the BTC version of Bitcoin has been the highest appreciating asset over over a set period of time in like global financial history. I think that alone, you don't even need to say anything more. I think that makes it pretty compelling to have some percentage of that in your portfolio. But really on top of that, every savvy investor knows that inflation is, terrible for the cash and fixed income part of their book. And on some short-term level, good for perhaps the rest of their holdings, but really over the long term, I think having like rapid inflation and lots of volatility in employment and in kind of all the things that happen in society, you don't want periods of like rapid inflation, rapid deflation. You want something a little more steady. And that I think anyone looking at markets today and is seeing, I think, significantly more, not really inflation as we don't need to go down the inflation deflation rabbit hole right now, but I think there's a really strong argument to be made that Bitcoin today right now has the market share, it has the brand for being the crypto asset, the blockchain technology network that you use to store your wealth outside of the fiat monetary system, and outside of equities and outside of what might be in one's portfolio. So it makes sense to have this asset as a hedge for inflation, on a hedge on kind of the US government and the petrodollar working out. And today it has worked out better than everything else. It has by far the best market share. So if you want to express that kind of anti-inflation crypto view, this is the best way to do it. And you're also betting on blockchain technology, but don't ask too much about why you're betting on blockchain, because then the argument starts to go apart, I think. But yeah, it's the proof of work network as well that has the greatest amount of hash power. So in many ways, the BTC network is the most secure network in the world today. Still, Bitcoin SV, even at a market cap of around like 1/200th something of the price, it on some level is like 1/200th as secure as BTC, but still like many orders magnitude more secure than the most secure private NSA or CIA type of server, because of the nature of the distributed public database. So I think it being the most secure network is a fact today, but I think a lot of folks in the BTC world think that the hash power leads and then price follows, where I really think it's the opposite, and that's kind of an empirical problem that can be proven out. But that would be, I think, a part of the steel man, but not one that I think would be a particularly compelling part. And then it could even be used as a legal reserve asset. So if we never have any blockchain that scales and becomes a good settlement layer, which I think is very unlikely, but if that were to be the case, BTC today is the most like secure and efficient way to settle something kind of for sure with some degree of finality. So it being used by central banks and governments as purely that settlement layer where you're not doing anything illegal, but people are voluntarily just paying absurdly high transaction fees because they know that it comes with security, I think that could make sense. Again, there's a big if there with that if you didn't have something that was also secure, but instead of growing transaction fees, falling transaction fees. But I think that those are kind of the main pro BTC arguments that I can get behind. And really, if it wasn't for my thinking that the probability that governments would be able to confiscate it like in a technical way was pretty high, I think owning some would make some sense.
Interesting. And I think it was Lord Keynes who said, if you want to destroy a country, destroy their currency. And, the Weimar Republic in Germany and lots of other examples of like, horrible, horrible things happening when the currency got destroyed, and through inflation mostly, because they just kept printing it and the script. I think that's a weaker argument for the United States, the US dollar. Again, that's a much longer conversation and an interesting one, I think. But I want to stay on this because I'm going to ask you now, Steelman, the anti-Bitcoin SV argument.
So when you say this, like there's a few things that are coming to mind, which is like, what are the most compelling sound bites against this? But a lot of these things are founded with misconceptions on how the things work. But I think probably the most helpful thing for the listeners is going to be talking about what people actually say against it, and then maybe debunking why some of those things aren't so, in fact, correct. So I think the big thing that people will say, first is, Craig Wright did not create Bitcoin. Craig Wright is a big fan of BSV and said he created Bitcoin, is involved in the network. Therefore, because he's a scammer and a fraudster, this Bitcoin SV network is also a scam and a fraud. And I don't need to look any further. I don't need to look at all the entrepreneurs. I don't need to look at what you're doing. That's enough for me. And my what I would say to that is, you can link to this in the notes. I think whether Craig created Bitcoin or not is relatively immaterial to the long-term success. I think it's perhaps material to the short-term like success and the probability of, say, like a huge catalyst for more folks being interested in BSV. But I'm a lot happier and enjoy spending my time more talking about the technology rather than this question. I direct you to our research. We wrote a piece on the site that maybe you guys could link to in the show notes to kind of fully explore that. The next thing people would say is kind of decentralization versus centralization. So they would say that, BSV is a centralized blockchain network, so you lose all the value of blockchain, where the BTC network is really decentralized. Crypto has its value from being decentralized, therefore BSV bad, BTC good. So there's a couple things you need to unpack here. One, that in every meaningful sense, BSV and BTC are about the same degree of decentralized. And then we also need to, I think, unpack what decentralization is and means. So the way that I think about how people use decentralization is it's kind of combining two things. And Jim, as someone who is a fellow, hates labels and thinks how they often, bring us apart rather than giving clarity on a topic or an idea, I think this is a really good example of it, where I think a lot of people like the word decentralized. Let's not centralize it. Sure, that sounds good. But what does that actually mean? And I think in practice, it is a combination of having your network be able to exist outside of what governments want. So even if governments wanted to shut this thing down or change it, they couldn't. And then it's distributing power and information. So as you could probably tell, and I would imagine this would be the same for you, the latter is awesome. Let's distribute power. Let's have everyone be a really small part of an underwriting process for a tiny loan in the other part of the world. Like, great. Let's have 100,000 people fund this loan. The transaction fee be 1/1000th of a penny, and everyone wins and is kind of more embedded together. But in terms of now, let's do this in a way where if you're doing it from the US, even though we have like laws around being a money transmitter or a registered loan agent, let's just say, no, we don't want that. And because it's on the blockchain, it's actually not illegal. And let's now build our systems such that we're trading off speed and cost to be able to do that. So when I think about it, it kind of just makes my blood boil with how focused people are on decentralization and how little they do to unpack it. Where I think a lot of the folks on Wall Street that well that are super excited about Solana, that are really excited about DeFi, they're really excited about the distributed finance part. I don't think they're actually excited about the other, but they haven't really examined it. They haven't kind of unpacked that for themselves. So yeah.
I love it. Okay, I think I love the fact I often ask people. Adam Grant has a great book on how to rethink things, yep. And the Steel Man is a huge part of that. So
I want to get something, Jim. I gotta show you. I gotta show you this. So we're such big fans of Steel Manning that the first book that we wrote, we took each chapter is kind of the Steelman of the consensus view and then our view. So it's 10 chapters, 10 things that do that. And I'm going to have to shamelessly plug it here. How Bitcoin SV will win, why the crypto consensus is wrong. You can link to it in the show notes, free at unboundedcapital.com. And
I love it. I'll read it.
That's how we came to where we are today, which is by doing our weekly Steel Manning call, where we really believe as investors that you don't really believe, what you think until you know every argument against it and until you know kind of every argument for it and the counter argument. So I would highly recommend that book as well as that process kind of to anyone, and appreciate you kind of using that language and specifically pushing me on this, because I mainly just talk about the long BSV, long blockchain scaling thing, but it's, I think, an important exercise to do more regularly, this kind of like really being as charitable as possible to, an opposing thesis.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's the only way to truly understand things is you got to understand your opponent's viewpoint, and you've got to look for every one of their best points, because it's one of the reasons why I subscribe to a bunch of Substacks that I might not necessarily agree with their point of view, but I need to know about it, because they're going to many times have really good arguments that make the case against what I'm making a case for. And if it's even like, there's been some instances where it's been so much better that I changed my mind. And so I think that, that if you really want to get good at optimizing how to think about things, this is the only way to do it. Chanting and it descending into dogma, to me, dogma equals brain death. And it now, if there's a propagandist, they're going to say, no, repetition. And, you're going to get people, you're going to put people into a place where, that's all they're able to do. Yeah, don't think so. Because there's always going to be someone who comes along and says, yeah, I understand there's this huge group that believes X, but let me tell you why it's Y. But you got to understand why they believe X in the first place. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what we kind of bonded over at the Capital Camp, and that is music, poker, and travel. And so, I love all forms of music. I'm the former chairman of the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. I love Bach. Jazz is another one. Like, so Dave Brubeck's Take 5, like, I love it. And so I found a quote from Dave where it was really simple. It's like, jazz stands for freedom. And I'm like, that's really cool. And then Gershwin said that jazz was a lot like life. The best way is to improvise. And then I found one final quote that really, I think, speaks to maybe what we're talking about here. And it was by Miles Davis. And he basically said, jazz is revolutionary. And it often leads to revolutions in music. And then, finally, Louis Armstrong, if you have to ask what jazz is, you'll never know. And so, like, I'm a huge believer. See, I used the word there. I'm a huge fan of Taoism and of Wu Wei, and I think it offers amazing guidance for how to think and how to get along. So, what attracted you to jazz specifically?
So I was really lucky in that the guy who ran our school district was a trombonist in the Stan Kennon Orchestra, whose father was also a trombonist in the Stan Kennon Orchestra, who was on the Ed Sullivan Show briefly, and wasn't just an incredible trombone player and jazz lover. He also was a really wonderful teacher. And I started playing trumpet in the 3rd grade, just because at my school we were lucky to, choose to do orchestra or band, and I auditioned for drums, like half of the guys, and they only picked the ones with the best rhythm, and they told everyone else to do something else. And 2 of my best friends were playing the trumpets. I was like, okay, I want to sit next to these people. And then this guy, Don DuPont, senior, he, for some of the students that he liked, he would offer private lessons kind of outside of school. And then for some of those people, he had 3 different jazz bands he did every Tuesday night, each for a little over an hour. One kind of for like middle schoolers, or late elementary school, early middle school, late middle school, high school, and then like late high school and, kind of those of the dad's age of people in the band, maybe like 2/3 kind of adults and 1/3 of like the good high school students. And you would sight read swing music from kind of the era that he played. And that just gave me a really big appreciation for jazz pretty early on, where most of my fun playing trumpet was this every Tuesday night kind of jazz band thing. And then my parents really, loved, appreciate music. And I grew up listening to a lot of kind of like Stevie Wonder and really like kind of funk and R&B, which actually have a lot of influence by jazz music. And and then I started going to music school in high school and went to music school for school, and just kind of kept continually falling in love with it, and still a big part of my life today. And I love playing the trumpet, playing other instruments, and just listening, writing, playing improvised music.
Yeah, me too. I don't play anything. Maybe I'll do a Grandma Moses and take something up. So Benny Goodman, my dad was also a fan of the swing and things like that. And I remember the first time I heard Sing, Sing, Sing. And there's a lot of our listeners who've never heard Sing, Sing, Sing. I urge you, go to YouTube and find the longest actual footage of Benny Goodman and his orchestra playing it. When they debuted that at Carnegie Hall, I just I think that the people must have been blown away, and because it was so foreign to the type. I mean, Gene Krupa with the riffs on the drums, and it's just magical in my opinion, right? And so that's maybe how people felt about new forms of music today. Let's move on to poker. So Annie Duke is a friend of mine, and she's been very successful at talking about how understanding poker and betting can really make you a better investor. And so I've worked on. I do a lot of threads on Twitter, and I talk about it here on the podcast and everything. One of the things I was working on this really long thread where I was using the word bet, and then I was trying it out on some friends, and I watched for the reactions, right? And so I stopped, and I'll tell you why I stopped. I stopped because I found that the term bet had created a label that was so powerful that you say bet to your average human being, even if they're really intelligent, they think of gambling. They think that gambling is dangerous and or risky, and they go down that path, and you've lost them. So I think that every time you wake up, you are making a bet every day of your life with everything you do. It's a bet. And if you really want to understand, is somebody well optimized or are they poorly optimized? How do their bets turn out? What are the base rates of their bets? So I use different language and everything. But tell me, what have you learned from your love of poker in terms of specifically how you do investments absent that love?
So I think, Annie's written really eloquently on the subject. And I think for a lot of folks, especially in the investing world, she's probably the biggest influence for kind of turning bet from a dirty word to a positive word for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
I know for me, definitely a learning of just connecting to other investors was, changing the language that I use to describe the same concepts, coming from a, kind of semi-professional poker player and mindset coach and educator to, a blockchain focused investor. But fundamentally, these are the same things. You're doing the same types of decision-making processes. The difference with poker compared to other, other forms of investing or making bets is that you have really tight feedback loops and you have a no number of variables. So in terms of it being like a great stomping ground for just really honing your decision-making processes, for being aware of what are the things that get you in poker they'd call on tilt. And I think that language is being used more and more in maybe New York Wall Street world, but still saying on tilt outside of poker players is not something that you hear all the time in venture or PE or most investing. But it's just this concept of when are you allowing your emotions to kind of dominate your reasoning and to no longer serve you. So it makes sense to use your emotions to pick up qualitative information that can go into your algorithm. It could make sense to follow your gut. But to allow your kind of emotions to override your systems and your processes for a variety of reasons, that's kind of when you get in trouble. And with poker, you kind of know you get in trouble very soon if you're being honest with yourself. And if you're playing with someone else or someone's recording, you're playing online, it's hard, but I wouldn't say it's hard. It's very easy if you want to find that information. Most poker players are not honest with themselves, which is why most poker players lose, which is why most traders lose, which is why a lot of people can't do the types of things they think they want to achieve. But poker is just a really good way to say, here's gonna be my new process, and then I'm gonna play 5,000 hands online, 8 tables at once over the course of a night, and now I've made 5,000 differing degrees of complexity with limited information. And now I can analyze these and I could say, okay, when I made this poor decision, was it because I didn't understand the strategy or was it because I didn't execute the strategy well? And the vast majority of mistakes in financial markets and poker is the latter. It's not the former. So I think poker is really good for creating good systems there. And honestly, for me, teaching, so I've worked primarily as a teacher in kind of three areas of passion that aren't blockchain for me. And now, of course, that's an area as well. But first, music and teaching people music, and then kind of teaching people, poker and poker strategy, and then helping people like kind of optimize their credit card miles and points and doing travel hacking and things. But with the poker stuff, I find I didn't really learn it and understand it until I was able to simply explain it to others. And the process of helping people with way bigger tilt problems than me kind of reduce their tilt helped me kind of come closer to eliminating mine. And now I know, and there's a great book on this as it applies to poker, but it kind of applies to everything else, called Jared Tendler's The Mental Game of Poker. And there's two of them. Maybe there's even a third one. I think he wrote one for traders actually as well that I'm sure is good, even though I haven't read it. And yeah, I know now, like, what are the types of tilt that is most probable for me? And for me, it is entitlement tilt. It is when I'm playing poker, I feel like I'm better than other people at the poker table. Maybe I am better than them. And then when I lose due to variance, I feel like I should have been entitled to some type of win. That's the type of thing. And then the other type of tilt is mistake tilt, which is when I make a mistake, I compound that by being hard on myself rather than kind of being kind or forgiving myself. A lot of the other types of tilt I don't really have. Those are my two things. And they apply just as much to my job today, which is sometimes you make a mistake and then you could be down on yourself for however long, or you could just, soberly analyze it with your team, reflect on it and move on. And then entitlement as well used to be a much bigger problem for me at the fund, whereas especially kind of early on at the BSV thesis was like, wow, we really figured this thing out. And like, no one's given us any money. People that I thought were my friends were, no longer wanting to talk to me because they're so into this crypto tribe. And I felt, man, like I should be, entitled to the success I was having before, or to some type of social thing. And then when I let that shit go, which not completely, you never let it go completely, but things started to go a lot better for us.
Wow. Again, I don't know, man. You might have been, maybe, how old are you?
I'm 28.
Okay. Yeah. So you could definitely be a long lost son of mine. No, just kidding. Just kidding. Because I mean, like, you're giving my own core tenets right back to me. And like, the ability to dispassionately analyze yourself is like almost impossible to do. I work with a lot of people, and on that score, it's really, really hard. And so I'm a big believer in writing everything down because, at least, and doing it by hand. And there's some good research why that triggers a different portion of your brain. But it also has led me to the conclusion that if you think, oh, I understand this entirely, and then you try to write it and you look at it, you think, I don't have a fucking idea about this. And also you have to reframe mistakes. Like, I'm not hard on myself about mistakes at all, because I look at mistakes as learning opportunities and as, wow, now I get to find a way to re-optimize my mental models. And I hate the term, but Charlie Munger with his lattice work of mental models, it's like, it really does work. It's a meme that has like taken over, but yeah. Because, it does in fact describe the way you always have to be error correcting. And like, the minute you are very willing to say, I fuck up all the time, that, at least in my life, changes things so dramatically that, guess what? You start fucking up less and less, because you're totally open to correcting the error. And I love your entitlement thing. I had that when I was younger, and man, that's a hard one to get over, because another guy I love, Jed McKenna, he's got a great quote, which is the hardest thing to get over or lose is self-deceit, because you don't think you're self-deceiving yourself. and you are, And
Always. Yeah. We're
always
status seeking,
monkeys.
animals. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just like we're domesticated primates, man. And the more you understand that, the more you're willing to just kind of look with bemusement at a lot of things. And like, so, the meme of yes, no, 0, 1, black, white, deterministic thinking. I tell you what, man, if you don't learn how to become a probabilistic thinker, and if you don't get yourself to be better at nonlinear thought, and if you fear chaos, you're not going to do well in the world that is emerging, because that there you go, another meme that, like, and I understand, by the way, I am an anomaly in many respects, in that I'm risk seeking. I love like risk, and
how would you define risk?
That's a great question. And I would define risk as an investment that I deeply believe in literally going to zero. I don't define risk by volatility.
Yeah.
I don't define risk by my being wrong, right? Because I'm going to be wrong. Most people look at risk as a number, right? So I think that's a huge mistake, because it gets people value at risk. I'm sure you're familiar with that idea. I think it's crap, because it lulls people into being overconfident, because they think they're looking at one number. Well, it says here that the value at risk is only 13%, and please. I mean, if you stress test these models, like, it's child's play to understand that all risk assets correlations go to 1 when people are panicking. And so I think that I guess another like great way to be risk, or think about risk, is, am I just deluded in terms of the way I see the world? And that's hard for many people to ask, because, like, another good explanation as far as me is, if you think of risk as the possibility that you're going to lose like all your money, or lose status, or lose a lot of things, makes people very risk averse. And I think, like, just the opposite, like the biggest risk is not taking the risk.
But so this gets at something, Jim, that I'm really passionate about, which is like, a lot of people look at me as like a very risk seeking type of person, or like a high risk tolerance person.
Yeah.
I don't view myself that way. And I think by the way you're talking about it, you probably wouldn't view yourself that way on the things that actually matter, which
Right.
is, by not taking calculated risks, you're often taking huge, giant risks, whether you're aware of them or not. So
Right.
I think you always have to look at risk in the context of expected value, which is, and that basically means and this is a reframing for most people, because for most folks, it's like, how can I do all the stuff I want while minimizing risk? Where if you look at risk in the context of expected value, then you actually want to optimize risk. And then, you'll probably find that most of what you're doing is taking way too little risk on something and taking way too much risk on some other things. So yeah, I was curious how you kind of defined it there, and the fact that you explicitly called out value at risk and that volatility isn't part of it. I think that makes a lot of sense. And, like all these labels and these words, because risk is just so used and meant so many things by different people are just really often talking over each other when it comes to, what is risk, or I'm doing something risky, or, really it's the chance of a certain expected value. To me, that's what risk is. So if the expected value, and you could derive volatility from that, but, and in poker, you could actually know that expected value, or you could make a probabilistic estimate based on the range of hands. What makes markets in real life more exciting is kind of, the unknown unknowns, which is, that at any given point, for everything that you game out, you're missing, like, even if you're the smartest, most diligent investor, you're missing so much, which is, I think that's what makes these games kind of the most fun and infinite like to play, rather than a game like, poker.
Totally agree. So let me ask you one last question, and then I'm going to ask you our closing question, because I got to look at my time here. Yeah, we try. Yeah, this is great. So what am I going to hear when I release this podcast?
You are going to hear, how could you let someone associated with something so bad and scammy on your podcast? That's probably going to be the main ad hominem attack. And then there'll be a whole series of other ones. But yeah, that I'd say is going to be a lot of what you're going to hear. I hope you're also going to hear, hey, I've never thought about it this way. I'm excited to learn more. And from what I know about you and the kind of Infinite Loops brand, I'm confident there'll be a sizable portion of people that will be in that camp. But, the people in that camp are probably less likely to email you saying something. You're going to get the people that love it, the people that hate it. Who knows? Maybe you have, there's probably some percentage of your listener base that really likes Bitcoin scaling and BSV already. But that's going to be outnumbered by the people that really like BTC, that really like Ethereum, and that feel that a lot of what I'm saying now is kind of going up against not just, again, their thesis, but more importantly, their cultural identity. And that's the most difficult problem for me, which is why, it's fun to have these conversations and speak very frankly about it. But as someone who's also in the business of building connections and fundraising, I don't think I would necessarily speak in this way to everyone. But now it's in the public, so I guess I kind of am. So
yeah, so that's what's great, man. And you're absolutely right about our audience. It's like a self-selected group of folks, and what I always am very public about is I want to have people who have really interesting thesis on. Anyway, I'm very excited to release this because I can hardly wait to see what the reaction is. So my final question is, so my son is the podcast king, and he took a really good question, but I like this one too, and so we're going to make you emperor of the world for a day. You cannot kill anyone. You can't put anyone in re-education camps. But what you can do is you've seen the movie Inception, right?
I have, yeah.
Okay, so you get to put an earworm in there that they're going to wake up tomorrow thinking two thoughts were their own ideas, and they're going to just change to those two things. What do you got for me?
I would say love yourself, and it's going to be okay.
Oh man, that is fantastic. That is really great, because that is like one of the, I'm big into, and it's really hard because they get classified as spiritual, but it's like not really. Like Jed McKenna on Awakening, Taoism. Yeah. I mean, if you really understand the Tao, it'll freak a lot of people out. But one of the things, the guy I'm going to refer to, Anthony DeMello, who was like he was Indian, from India. He was a Catholic Jesuit priest. Hello. And he had an experience with a rickshaw driver in, I can't remember where it was, Bangladesh, I think. I might be wrong. I'd have to look that up. So I've read everything he's written since this awakening. Unfortunately, he died very young. And by the way, if anyone is listening is interested, you just go to YouTube. There's a bunch of tapes of his talks and everything. But love yourself is that is one of his conclusions. By the way, same with Brian Romelli. And people think that, well, that's, how selfish of me, how blah, blah, blah of me. Man, the only person you can fix is yourself. So instead of trying to change the world, change yourself and, kind of let the world unfold as it unfolds. So I love both of those. Love yourself. And what was it? It was going to be okay. Everything could be okay.
It's going to be okay.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Man, can you imagine what that world would look like?
I'm trying to say that to myself every morning and still having a hard time believing it a lot of the time. But the more I believe it, the more I like the way the world looks to me. So.
It's transformational, man. It is transformational. And if you can also understand or come to the understanding that you cannot change other people, you can compel other people, you can force other people, but you're not going to change their belief. You're going to get their resentment, maybe. But you can help them, right? And so, like, I believe that for a long, long time. Again, listen to me, believe. I should get like a rubber band that I snap my wrist every time I say it. But very cool. You are a switched on guy, my friend. This has been awesome.